All right. Hey, are you ready to do this podcast?
I am.
Mr. Magnum PI?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So why don't you, with that amazing shirt, introduce yourself to all these people? Because that just occurred to me where that shirt came from today.
My name's Drew Biemer. I'm from New Hampshire. I'm agency director at the state level in charge of energy, facility, siting, and permitting.
Oh, man, that's a lot to unpackage.
Yeah.
Drew, how does someone get into that? How does someone, because that's, we just recently met, and one of the things that we've been working on is trying to really uncover the complications of power and energy and try to figure out how our industry collides with it into the mainstream, right? So I'm not sure where we cross paths at and stuff, but like if you've listened to this podcast, some podcasts are there to entertain, others for sure, maybe inspire a few if we can, but some are really there to enlighten and educate. I'm hoping this is a little bit of all of it, right? So I really want to help people understand how complicated it is just to put more power on the grid sort of thing. And it starts with doing what you do, which is going out and finding land and working on big programs and stuff, right?
Sure. So I got to where I am by
where are you from?
Dropping out of college.
Perfect.
I grew up right outside of Philadelphia, a town called Haddonfield, New Jersey. And I went to college at the University of Richmond to play football. That lasted for 2 years. And I kicked around a little bit, and then I eventually went into politics in 2004.
Okay.
I got hired onto the Bush-Cheney re-election campaign, and they sent me out to West Virginia, out to the coal counties. So that was the first time in my life that the intersection of politics and energy came together, because coal is big politics out there.
Yeah. So let's, before that, did you have any inclination that you were going to head towards this path, either politically or from statistics that I read that 1 out of 4 kids will graduate from college this year with a degree that's been made obsolete because of technology already. So it's interesting what we're going to do to repopulate the middle class with labor, getting more into the trades or, professional services and stuff. But you don't have to have one of these college degrees to go out and figure out what we're doing in this industry right now. Do you agree?
You just need to understand how to solve problems.
And you have to immerse yourself with questions, right? You have to really sit down. It's immersion. I think we learn things through immersion, and then you have to have that critical question attitude to really unpackage really complicated shit. And the only way to do that is to be truly interested, right? So there are people that are listening that have had me talk about microgrids just recently. We have all kinds of people that come on and talk about distributed natural gas generation plants, energy providers in the form of generation like diesel or natural gas. Haven't had turbine folks on yet, but really what I want to do is I wanted to address it from a state level, and then eventually we'll get to the federal level, because I'm bringing on some nuclear people to talk to in future weeks. But for you heard us talking about the challenges of trying to get to the demands that AI is driving on data centers and infrastructure, and how that's hitting you at the state level now, right?
Well, the entire demand is hitting us at the state level. We have a lot of generation that's scheduled to retire. We have virtually no plan to replace it. And we're going to need to figure out things like base load. We're going to need to figure out transmission capacity, and we're going to need to figure out distributed generation.
Okay, so that's perfect, because that now dovetails into where you were just starting from, which is you started in West Virginia and you started with coal, which is like the primary pillar of energy in the United States. And then you're going to walk us all the way through to where we're going to probably end up talking about the challenges of sustainability and the bridging solutions to get to nuclear, right?
Sure, yeah.
So why don't you get to, how old, this is 2004?
In 4, so I was 23.
Okay, so in 23, you head out, you're in politics, you're working for the Republican side, and you're out there trying to figure out how to gain support optically or visually within the communities for more support towards coal energy.
No, it was for the Bush-Cheney re-election campaign.
Okay.
So I was out there as a political campaign staffer, and they sent me there because nobody else wanted to go to West Virginia. So they keep a talent pool of people. You put in for a job, you put your resume in, you click if you want a specific state. I just basically did first available, and they sent me where no one else wanted to go. Okay. So the mission there, and this is hard to believe now, West Virginia in 2004 was the most democratic part of the entire country.
Really?
In terms of voter registration. And it was because of union labor, particularly the coal miners union. and we were trying to get them to flip and vote Republican. So that was the mission. We got them to vote for W, reelect. And then since then, that expedited a total flip of that state. After I went to West Virginia, I spent the next 6 or 7 years of my career in political campaign management at different levels in different states, congressional, local, statewide. And then in 2010, I moved to New Hampshire because there was a firm that was looking for a political guy who could help them with their energy clients.
Okay.
And that was me.
Nice. So in 2010, you're up in New Hampshire. Talk to me through, like, what are their energy clients for are they trying to get people to come up there and drill in New Hampshire? That's what I'm
Not
saying.
yet.
Like, okay. So what are we talking about up there?
So at the time, there was a massive hydroelectric project that would have connected Quebec with the New England grid. And it would have brought about a nuclear power plant amount of energy into the New England grid.
So something in the gigawatts.
1,200 megawatts.
Okay.
And it was a huge controversial project. We worked on it for 8 or 10 years, and it ended up not getting built.
Wow.
Due mostly to local opposition.
Okay. What was the opposition? Hydro. What was the opposition to hydro?
Environmental issues.
Jeez.
We can seg into the Astroturf conversation now if you want, or if you want to put that up for later.
No. Dude, look, unpackage that. That's how we met.
So at the strategic level, at the policy level, you have different people working against each other. And then at the tactical level, when you're trying to cite a project, those alliances don't always hold up. So at the strategic level, the people trying to keep large-scale hydro out of the United States are other people in the baseload power discussion. Nuclear, natural gas, to a lesser extent, coal. And what they will do is they will fund opposition campaigns at the tactical level that will focus on things like environmental impacts. They'll say, you're going to kill the trees.
They just play into the regulatory games. They just try to find where the fine print is at, and they try to use one of those things.
You're gonna destroy, the rivers. All the power is going to go to Boston. We're not going to benefit from any of the power. So what a lot of people don't realize is the people who are carrying the environmental message at the grassroots level are oftentimes funded by people who don't believe that message themselves.
Right.
Like
they're just paid.
They're just using them as the foot soldiers. At the ground level, one of the things that people need to realize today, and a lot of these companies that are trying to build stuff are your formerly monopolistic, vertically integrated utility companies of the 20th century. They're branching out into what they call merchant generation. It's mostly a deregulated market. Those people aren't particularly well equipped to fight hot political grassroots battles because they're used to just getting what they wanted.
Interesting.
And what always happens is in this day and age and in this world we live in, you need to understand that what used to be a public relations battle or a lobbying battle or a regulatory law battle is now a holistic information operation that combines all of those things.
Really?
Absolutely.
Do some of the same firms that advocate on behalf of one thing or the other represent both sides or three sides?
I wouldn't say both, but they're
just hired guns to stir the pot using whatever tools and resources they have, but they don't care. Like you said, they don't care. They're just paid to go oppose.
They wouldn't represent both sides of the same issue.
Okay.
But, this year they may be working for nuclear, blocking LNG. Okay. And next year they might be working for LNG blocking coal.
Okay. Well, listen, let's back up. So, I think, so that everybody that's listening, because I don't want to get too far out in the ethers yet. I want to maybe get a little bit reined in so I'm afraid I'll lose people. I really want them to connect the dots to what they do, to the impact of energy, the impact of our growth of industry's demand of energy, more specifically, and the impact as it ripples onto them as an individual, both as a consumer of technology, as a professional in the same industry. So looking at this, there was something that I think Mike and I did a podcast. Is that what you've stumbled on? And then in that you wrote something on LinkedIn and the title of that white paper was Astroturfing.
Correct.
So explain to people, because I know we kind of just jumped into it because guys like you and I both seem to be wired pretty tight. We could just start driving, right? So explain the genesis behind what drove you to want to publish that. And then what the whole message of intent was behind educating people that we don't really have real problems. Sometimes we have manufactured problems that are having a massive impact on us as consumers, and we have to put an end to that shit too.
Sure.
It's like, I'm painting with a broad stroke, but I want you to kind of fill in that gap.
So there's an old saying called bootleggers and Baptists. Have you ever heard of that before? So bootleggers and Baptists are the two groups of people who wanted to prolong prohibition in the United States.
Oh, of course.
The Baptists did it for ideological reasons. The bootleggers did it for monetary reasons, right? Financial reasons. So bootleggers and Baptists don't have a whole heck of a lot in common other than the fact that they both want alcohol to be illegal. So when you take that dynamic and you overlay it onto the energy industry, you have people going to war with each other, really, really peculiar alliances of groups to fight a common enemy or achieve a common goal. A good example of that is some years ago, there was a campaign called Beyond Coal that I believe was the Sierra Club. And the Beyond Coal campaign was funded in large part by natural gas, by the fracking industry. Okay. So that doesn't make one better or worse. It just means that, you're funding an environmental organization, right, to block a certain type of generation.
It's just an opposition.
Right.
We're hiring these environmentalists to go shut down the competition.
And a lot of these groups actually run a protection racket where they will actually go to people and say, hey, we'd love to come on and support your project and talk about how great it is for the environment, And if you're smart, depending on who they are, you say, sure, we'll make a donation, what can we do for you? If you don't, then a lot of them magically arrive at the conclusion that your opponent's project is the environmentally friendly one, not your project. So astroturfing is basically high-level information warfare and psychological operations at the mass scale. It manifests itself in scaring people about nuclear so they don't build nuclear.
Yep.
It manifests itself at the grassroots level in telling people that building a wind farm or a solar array is not environmentally friendly because you have to, build it next to a wetland or something. So it's never the person or the interest doing the talking. It's an intermediary that they're paying to do the astroturfing. Usually an environmental org. It can be an organization that you just create. Yeah. If you ever hear of an organization, and I'm making this up, so if this is a real one, I apologize, but something that sounds like Center for Consumer Freedom or Coalition for Energy Security or
it makes it sound like that, they have the best intention.
I can almost guarantee you that that's an AstroTurf organization, and you need to do due diligence and you need to say who are their funders and who are their sponsors. Unlike a political campaign and unlike lobbying, they don't have to disclose their donors, though, because it's a nonprofit organization. They don't have to disclose their donors any more than the Red Cross has to disclose. If it were a political campaign, if they were putting money behind a candidate, that would be disclosed. If they were putting money behind a lobbying effort for a bill, for a piece of legislation, that would be disclosed. If you're just running a mass information campaign on the public, that just falls under the category of free speech. And, energy giant A can give unlimited funds to environmental org to spend opposing energy giant B.
And that's how it works.
That's how it works on everything.
Everything political, you mean?
I mean on everything that involves land use. That's how people oppose Walmarts. That's how people oppose new shopping centers. If you're building anything anywhere, you're always new. You're always taking money out of the pocket of whoever does that same thing. Town over.
I got you. So like for people to understand, we have to look at our political representatives or at the local level, not just like at the presidential level. We have to ask ourselves, are they being influenced by one group over the other that it has the best of our interest in mind. And half the time, or if not more than that, it sounds like it's probably not the case. You have a lot of money going into anything that's related to energy right now. Like, as an example, I don't think it was you. There was another gentleman that we're having on the podcast, and we were talking about energy from a government perspective. And he implied that right now they have so much pressure coming from the oil and gas and the industry as a whole to be as resistant as they can to adopting nuclear, right? So they're the first ones that are trying to, protect regulatory oversight and things that would make it almost impossible for nuclear to be released more as a common form of energy within our country, right? So there's just so much momentum from opposing groups that they have the most to lose, I guess, if we go to nuclear, right? So the groups that have the most to lose are probably the ones that are going to be fighting for the newest, the hardest, right?
Absolutely.
What are you seeing where you're from then? I mean, you guys are trying to put together this hydro power plant, and what happened? Not having it, how did that impact the community at all?
There were a lot of communities along the line.
All of New England probably didn't. They probably suffered by not getting 1.2 gigs, right?
Well, now, in hindsight, there's a lot of remorse on the part of certain organizations and certain stakeholders because we're revisiting the concept with some of these things as to whether or not they were reliable baseload power. And it is very hard to argue at the macro level against large-scale hydro. In New England, large-scale hydro is not considered renewable. Yeah, so it has to be beneath a certain level of megawatts to be renewable. So biomass, on the other hand, is renewable.
Well, walk us through all the various options. Break us down. Educate us a little bit from the government's perspective. And I know it's your state, but every state probably has a little bit of overlapping offsets to certain others. So walk us through what some of the challenges are that you are seeing, and what are the pressures you're getting from the communities themselves too to get more renewables or more cleaner, safer, scalable energy.
So we had a monopolistic utility company for a century. And then in the early 2000s, they went through a deregulation process. In 2014, they finally divested all of their generation assets. So the utility company is a poles and wires company now. They charge you money, they send you the bill, the electricity goes over their poles and wires to your house, but they're not making it. All of the power is generated by private merchant generators who have purchased facilities or bought them and pump money onto the grid. The entire generation installed capacity of New Hampshire is 4,000 megawatts. About 1,000 of that is nuclear. So that's a pretty big chunk.
Yeah, 25%.
And about half, I believe, is natural gas.
Wow.
So the other 25% rounded out
coal
is minuscule amounts of oil, about 500 megawatts of coal. There's one burner still in New England. And then the rest is things like renewable energy.
But that's a really clean grid, actually, based on the way you described it. I didn't realize that 25% of it was nuclear already.
It is.
Where's the reactor at in New Hampshire?
It's in the southeastern corner in a town called Seabrook.
Okay.
On the Massachusetts border.
I think he probably said it was born in the 80s. When was this?
It was a long fight. I want to say it was actually operational in the early 90s, but the battle was in the 80s.
So how did you get to what you're doing right now? What is it that you do exactly? Break it down.
So when I came and started working for the firm in Concord, New Hampshire with the utility clients, they needed a political guy who understood how to navigate some of the complex political issues that these developments and these projects are facing today. Because it very much used to be file the permits, build the project.
Yeah.
And it's not like that anymore. There's a huge grassroots component. Your opponents are very, very sophisticated in causing problems for you. And they needed a political guy who could, one day be at the legislature, the next day be organizing grassroots people, could do crisis communications, could do what you would call civil affairs if you were in the military, community relations, who could look at the thing like a holistic information operation and draw upon the different tools we had on the team to address complex problems. Now, doing this for 12 years, you talk about immersion. all of my energy policy knowledge came from just doing this stuff for this long and having to read legislation and getting coached up on issues over the course of a 12-year period of time. So when I came to the job I'm in now, they needed somebody who could help with governmental reform, who could help with stakeholder engagement. The agency was regarded as being aloof to stakeholders and was suffering some reputational issues. And then they needed somebody who had enough energy policy knowledge that they could actually know how to move the ball forward on the core mission.
Did they have goals, or did the governor, I'm guessing, whoever appoints you, come up and be like, this is our initiative, these are our goals for our energy. We want to sell more than we make, or more than we use, or more, like, I don't know. Did they have any plans? Oh, we want it to be, I mean, it seems like it's incredibly clean. 500 megs of coal, that's about it. Small amount of oil, you said?
Yeah. Okay. So they did not discuss.
You guys use like jet engines, or you guys, what do you guys use for your energy solutions?
We do have jet engines co-located with our one coal power plant, and they're for shaving the peak off of ultra cold days.
Okay.
In New England, where we're increasingly trying to get people to heat with electricity.
Yeah.
Most people still heat with natural gas. We have pipeline constraints, and I believe you mentioned that on one of your podcasts. New England has severe pipeline constraints because they were built for residential use, not for utilities. So when we need to shave off the peak during ultra cold days in the wintertime,
you need to do with electricity.
You resort to things like jet engines to do it.
Really? Because so how much engine power can you get per engine?
You know what? I'm not sure.
I don't know how many. You only use those in the wintertime, I'm sure.
You can also use them to cold start the plant.
Okay.
So a lot of people don't realize that most plants are perpetually running and nuclear reactors perpetually running. A coal plant, especially one that has now been relegated to more of a peaker plant and like a capacity plant, it's not always running.
Yeah.
So they need to jump it from time to time.
Okay. I had no idea. So much to learn about this stuff. So what are some of the energy policies that you were tapped to come in and trying to help influence? And what do you understand to be best practices when you have to try to figure those out on behalf of a state?
So a lot of the actual energy policy, like what to build in the fuel mix, is done by the Department of Energy. Okay. And we have 3 energy-related organizations at the state level. The Department of Energy does policy. They also do things like fuel assistance. The Public Utilities Commission does rate cases. And then I do land use.
Okay.
So the things that were plaguing my agency that they needed to change. The first one was we had an investigation that had been going on for 2 years that we needed to wrap up amicably. So that was my first mission. It was into a wind facility. And the issue was that the wind facility was accused of being too loud by abutters. So we had to investigate sound complaints, and we had to investigate lighting complaints.
Okay. And what happens to those types of things? Who normally wins?
Well, the wind facilities are generally know how to stay in compliance. They're owned by massive multinational corporations. So ultimately, they were not out of compliance.
Sure. So, but they probably are going to continuously be plagued by noise, just like engines would be running, be plagued by noise complaints and stuff like that, right? But I mean, like, do these citizens understand that they need this energy?
The issue is that there is a accepted standard of how loud they can be, and they cannot exceed that accepted standard. So the issue, actually, and this might be a little too nerdy, is the accepted standard. The state measures it in terms of averages over the course of days, weeks, and months. How do you address the fact if the accepted standard is violated by
everybody
1/10 of a second increments? Once in a month. You know what I mean? So the argument was mostly over the standards and whether the standards were appropriate for this type of facility.
So what happens when you get past all the brain damage and you do some housekeeping when you get there? Now you have to figure out, was there a goal to be like 100% carbon neutral by 2030? I mean, like what were you driving?
We don't have a goal like that in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And if we do have a goal like that in New Hampshire, I'm probably not allowed to be involved in it because I just adjudicate things that are proposed. So you can propose any type of generation you want, and we're going to put it through a due diligence review process, and ultimately it's going to get voted on. Our committee is analogous probably to the Railroad Commission here in Texas. They make siting and permitting decisions. Here, it's mostly for things like oil and gas. Up there, it's mostly for things like wind and solar. But the big reforms that had to be made, we had to make the process more clear and more transparent for anybody who is proposing anything, because the Byzantine nature of our siting and permitting process causes a lot of people to not even try. So when we look at the future of energy in the state of New Hampshire, the number one thing that we had to do from a policy perspective is we had to make it easier to repurpose existing sites, because the existing sites already have the interconnection.
They're the transmissions.
They already have the transmission hookup. So we mentioned that coal power plant. Yeah. There's a plan in place to replace that with combination renewable battery and battery storage long term. And the point is that if we've accepted the fact that these aging mid-century fossil plants are going to not be here forever, and we've accepted the fact that whatever we replace them with is going to be better from an environmental perspective, then it should be easier to site something on that location than a brand new greenfield project.
Well, I think the problem with the greenfields is the transmission lines, right? Generation is not the challenge, like you were saying. It's transmitting, and what you have is a plant that already has transmission lines built in, the substations. Mm-hmm. So you're really, like you said, you're just kind of changing the engine underneath the hood, removing coal, putting hydrogen or whatever you're going to put there. Battery. Well, batteries seem to be the most unique limiting factor to everything we're doing on the microgrid side. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think they're the limiting factor on renewables in general.
Yeah.
Right now, a lot of the industrial scale batteries, you get like 6 to 8 hours, out of.
Yeah.
And the if we can get the technology to where it's really good, then that could take renewables and turn them into almost a base load adjacent type of power that you could count on when you needed it, because you could meter energy into the battery and then you can intermittently put it onto the grid from the battery. But the big liability with renewables right now is they're intermittent. So when you look at
there's only so many windy days, so many sunny days, you can't store that energy. Is that what you're talking about?
Especially in New Hampshire. It's only sunny on mountaintops, or only windy rather on mountaintops, and nobody wants to look at wind on mountaintops. And it's not particularly sunny most of the time. So with the microgrid solution that you've mentioned and the distributed generation solution, if the battery technology isn't to where we can replace baseload generation with batteries, then we should probably be looking at it as something where we use it as a component of a microgrid situation where you have a data center, you have some wind, you have some solar, you have some hookup to where you can benefit from market rate energy, but then you also have battery storage, because the ability to meter in and out of your own battery as a distributed resource actually makes a lot of sense from the same perspective that residential solar makes a lot of sense.
I agree with that.
Because you can spread out the demand. When people talk about industrial utility scale solar, I always say, fine in, Arizona, right? Maybe. But it's not a very good solution, at least not from a land use perspective, because it's gigantic. You would need 3,000 acres to replace a coal power plant. But the residential,
it's like 30 acres per megawatt.
Yeah.
Is that right? It is.
But the residential solar is great because
it's enough for a house on one roof.
Because then you distribute the demand and you don't need to worry about the transmission capacity as much anymore. And that's the choke point. If we had a base load first solution, if we just said we're going to go after as much base load as we can, we are still going to have a very difficult problem siting all the transmission we need.
Yeah, but I think what you're talking about going after base load is there's an upstream and a downstream. You're talking about getting more efficient on what we are using, not just what we are using, but of what we are using, how wasteful it is. Let me I want you to continue to educate us from the optics of you're a regulatory agency, right? So how often is New England or New Hampshire maybe getting are you getting a lot of people that want to go up there and maybe build technology? Do you see cloud data centers trying to figure out like we often hear, hey, such and such, one of the Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Oracle, you name them, they're going to Louisiana, they're going to Mississippi, they're going to Iowa, they're going to Ohio, they're going to Oklahoma. There's no state that they're really not going to. Are you the one that if a big data center hyperscaler wanted to come to the state of New Hampshire and they wanted to get into a greenfield scenario, it would be something that they would have to know what you're looking for. Is that correct?
They would have to touch on me at some part of the way, most likely because it would require co-located generation.
Okay, so talk to me through what that would require.
So my agency is over top of anything above 30 megawatts.
Okay.
So almost any SMR is going to be what we call utility scale.
Okay.
Most data centers, I believe you told me the average is what? 100 megawatts?
Yeah, the average click that we're building in today is about 100 megawatts. And that means that we're probably going to have at least 40 to 100 acres of land. You're using, 1.1 to 1.5 million gallons of water a day. You're going to put about 1,000 to 1,400 people to work just to build that thing. You're going to have 100 that stay there to keep the lights on and keep operating it. And you're going to need massive volumes of scalability with regards to power. So I feel like there's power plants that we're going to be distributed natural gas generation plants, solar plants, whatever we're going to do. We're going to be building in chunks of about 100 megawatts right now. That's about that is almost the new size right now as a standard for the industry.
Okay.
Isn't that crazy? And I mean, when I started in this industry, the average size was less than 1 megawatt. Retail colocation was anything less than 500 kW, and anything above 500 kW was considered wholesale. And now it's not like no one sells data halls anymore. We only sell buildings or dedicated buildings that are split in half. And now it's not even buildings. Now we're building campuses. So they're like, hey, I need, you're going to build a 10 campus building, your Vantage or Compass or one of the, okay, cool. I'll take 5 of the buildings, right? So we're seeing such this massive scale of growth to where like, we wouldn't build data centers where you're at unless you had something to do with it, because it's definitely going to require 30 megawatts is, what they grow at on a quarterly basis sometimes now, right? So you have to imagine, I don't know how hard it is to put more generation or the interconnection transmission lines that you guys have, but 4 gigs, I think is what you said the state of New Hampshire has. Okay. Yeah. I mean, like just in Northern Virginia, there's 2 gigs of just data center alone, right? So we have so much massive demand that we went from building 1 megawatt data centers to 10 would make a year to now 100 at a minimum on a click. And we're building, some of these companies are taking down gigawatts at a time right now. So we're in a part of it's an inflection point of our industry where it's the tipping point that brings us into the mainstream. The reason why the data center industry is not well known yet is because it hasn't really collided yet with any major mainstream industrialized industry like manufacturing and retail. We don't really fall in that bucket. We don't fall into real estate because we're a technology play that sells we sell our product by kW and megawatts, right? So we sell a product it's sold as power, just like the energy vertical. So there's a lot of reasons why these two industries are coming together, but it's really because there's such a massive demand of power and we're having such a hard time staffing the labor demands of the growth of this industry because of us, the consumers, that we're looking everywhere to build data centers in the United States now. Everywhere, not in the lower 48, even in Alaska, they're looking. There's people that I know that are trying to figure out what they can make out of Hawaii. But like you're up in New Hampshire, you're on the New England grid, you would think that there'd be a huge demand for data centers up there, specifically because the mechanical solution lends itself to more an economic efficiency up there because there's so much cold that's already up there, right? Yeah. So I'm wondering, what would it take to incentivize groups to come to New Hampshire to build data centers based on the optics and how you view it?
Well, I think first of all, if you're looking at building anything across the country, right, it could just be generation, or it could be data centers, or it could be data centers with co-located generation.
I think the product now is, I think that there's going to be gigawatts of data center capacity put online that will never have an interconnection grid request.
Okay.
And so that they're going to do that because we can't wait for the grid to show up. I don't know how hard it is to build in New Hampshire, but I imagine the window to build in is even more narrow than others, right? Because you're building on tundra up there, right? So like, there's got to be such a massive thing, but the demands are just huge now.
So where I was going with that is that if you're looking in a different part of the country, the economics are going to be different because you have different ISOs and different regulatory structures in states and in regions. New Hampshire, we think of ourselves as being special and alone in New England, but we're part of a regional grid. The grid operator is at the New England level. Okay. So if you were going to build in New Hampshire or anywhere in New England, I believe that the solution would probably be to go into the generation business with data as an add-on, not the data business that also has to build generation. Because we have fairly generous RPS requirements, renewable portfolio standard. I believe it's 25% of our power has to be renewable. Now, the categories are going to surprise some people. Biomass is renewable. We have a 75 megawatt biomass plant.
What is that? Just cow farting? What is that?
No, it's forestry. It's wood. Wood chips.
Really?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And the reason for it, it's not economic. The reason for it is to incentivize sustainable forestry.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So it's a source for sustainable forestry. So we have biomass, small scale hydro.
What's
solar.
Small scale? Less than 20, less than 30?
It's probably less than 20, something like that. The kind that you can put on a river.
Okay.
Okay. Because the kind that we're talking about, the Quebec kind, you need a reservoir, giant reservoir. Okay. So anyway.
So you're breaking them down for me. I'm just interrupting you as you do it because I want to make sure I understand it. So you went through biomass, which is wood.
Right.
Okay. You went into
solar.
Hydrogen is what you went into, less than 20.
Hydroelectric.
Hydroelectric, I'm sorry. Keep going. So
solar. I think solar's always renewable, regardless of how much you build. Offshore wind. Okay. It's questionable how much of that will get put up in the near future. And then there are some smaller categories of new technology that are not occurring to me right now. But basically, if you were able to qualify for RPS standards and you had your power plant next to your data center and you had a capacitor bank, let's say, it would be very easy to do what we call wheeling your power, where you could take the renewable energy that you're making off of your co-located renewable generation, you sell that into the grid at renewable prices, okay? And then the power you use for your data center, you buy back off the grid at market prices. So you're selling high, buying low.
I got you. So
you also can create an agreement with the utility company where you buy your power in things like year increments. Okay, ski mountains do that. Ski mountains in New Hampshire have deals with the power company where they get cheaper power overnight.
How?
You know why? Because people aren't using that much power overnight. Let's just call it midnight to 8 a.m. or whatever, or 8 to 8. And that's when they make all their snow. The highest power suck for a ski mountain is making snow overnight. Chairlifts are probably up there too, but you get the point. So the energy company says, how do we incentivize somebody buying any power at all, especially a high use customer at a point in time in the day where people really aren't buying that much power?
Right.
So you can also play games with the time of day. And that goes into a bigger question about things like smart grids and things like smart metering, where we're going to get to a point where even at your house, I believe, if you had solar and you're selling power onto the grid sometimes, and then you're buying power off of the grid sometimes, the price you make is going to be dependent on the market price at that exact second. Because we're going to need the power right now, or we're not going to need the power. So in New England, there would definitely be incentives if you probably proposed yourself as a distributed renewable generation company that was also bringing data a data center with jobs, high-tech jobs, skilled construction jobs to the area. Because if you want to build a data center and then tack on a power plant, that is far from being a foregone conclusion, okay? If you get through the power plant phase and you want to tack on a data center, that's a pretty light lift.
How hard is it to get through that first phase then? How long would it take to get a permit to build a 100 megawatt natural gas power plant in New Hampshire?
Natural gas might be a bad example because we have pipeline constraints.
Okay.
So the pipeline constraint might just poison pill the whole thing.
Okay.
But let's just say that you were trying to build, I don't know, a small scale nuclear, SMR, or like green hydrogen.
Okay.
The process for something that is not going to be choked by pipeline constraints, probably about a year.
Is it the permit?
Yeah, your whole process is going to be longer than a year because you have to take time to get stuff ready. From when you start the clock, you generally get done within a year. I believe that that's actually in statute. We have 365 days to render a decision. The decision can be no, but what you do is you go through various stages, and the various stages involve town meetings in the host communities.
Where they get the opportunity to protest the idea.
Very, very, very hot and contentious from time to time. That's why I tell people, if you're thinking of building something in anywhere in Utah in a year, you got to be there now.
Yeah.
You need to be building capital with the local community really, really, really far in advance. Because what a lot of these companies do is they just show up when they need something and they try to jam the facts and benefits down people's throats, and the people aren't buying, you know? So, it'd take about a year. You go through a public input component, and then you go through the regulatory component, which can be broken down different ways, but basically they're different categories of things that we are going to assess you on. One is your capability to even build the project.
To build it or operate it.
Yeah, that's the second one, okay? Build the project, operate the project, your financial capability, okay? The orderly development of the region.
So, okay, keep going. The orderly development of the region.
Yes, is it good for the overall development of the region?
Okay.
Okay. And the financial component is, so far, in my experience, not hard, because when we have these asset transfers where somebody buys a power plant from somebody else, they're all gigantic corporations.
Yeah, it's just a piece of paper.
We're the SPAC, because we are now finding that your local fire departments and local first responders in a lot of these towns are not equipped to deal with emergencies at these facilities.
Interesting.
They do not have the gear or the training
for a large industrial,
for a battery fire.
Okay. Yeah.
Wind turbines are built in rural areas. Does the volunteer fire department in a town of 500 people have a ladder tall enough to climb to put out a 500-foot wind turbine?
Okay, so that's I don't know. I mean, they probably don't know that when they're submitting this request. So then they're submitting an application that probably costs a couple $100,000 from the state, so they could go pay experts to do studies for them. Probably, is that what they're doing?
Exactly.
Okay. Now, does the state have a goal in mind already? One of your 4 things, and I'm asking your state, but I mean, I assume that what your state is doing is homogenous enough to where most states are looking at it through the same optics, right? There's probably things that are more unique. Like you said, if you have, as an example, capacity constraints, like you're the dyslexic version of Texas. Texas has the opposite of that. It has basins. It's got the Permian Basin. I mean, it's got so many things that it's pulling stuff out that we have a lot of capacity for natural gas running throughout the state, right? So every state's probably a little bit different, but there's, they're looking at the safety, like you said. They're looking at the ability to build it successfully without leaving something there that the city has to look at because they ran out of money in the middle of building it because they can't build it right. And oh, by the way, can they keep it, the community safe? Do they know how to operate it efficiently? But those things that you guys are looking for are probably at some altitude or airspeed, very similar to every other state. The difference is some states, like California as an example, does not give 2 shits about, they in fact don't want anybody having businesses there, right? They're trying
anybody at all.
Well, I mean, like they literally are it's obvious. It's not what they're saying, but they're removing the demand or interest in companies in being there. I think I even saw that Meta's looking to move from there, right? So the thing is they're not you tax people as an incentive or as a punishment. If you want them to do something you're favorable to, you're going to give.
I have not heard specific to data centers, and I think that's probably because our power situation in general is probably precarious enough that we're not, when you bake in the things that we know are coming, EVs, for one, I was going to say data centers would be a second one, but new technologies, the electrification of homes.
There's a lot of manufacturing coming back to the United States. And the funny part about the homes is I was surprised to read a report that showed that the largest consumer of energy isn't the industrial. It's the commercial, the industrial, and then residential. Residential, because you have so many homes that have massive power spikes, in the morning and the evening. And, that's why they have floating rate tables too, right? Because the price of power is a lot cheaper during the middle of the day when no one's really at home doing laundry or cooking. But, you look at these swings of energy and, I just lost my train of thought on that part. But what I was trying to say is I'm really trying to understand what it takes for a state to find the value in bringing the sky for the cloud or the home for AI there. And some states just don't want it and some do. But right now it's going to come down to which states have access to the largest volume of aggregate scalable power. And that's going to take a pretty quick and agile, deregulated energy market, I would imagine. Don't you agree?
I think so. But something that, when you talk about the difference between states, one of the talking points that Democrats would use about the IRA money, the Inflation Reduction Act money, that was just infrastructure spending, right? Is that taking it away would disproportionately hurt red states. That's what they were talking about. In defense of the IRA, they would say most of this money goes to red states. The reason most of it goes to red states is because you can actually build stuff there, okay? Most of the renewable energy is going online in places like Texas and Oklahoma because they don't put up as many barriers to building it. It's a safer investment. So, when we talk about economic development stuff in New Hampshire, we're always trying to lure an Amazon, like warehouse, right? Not a data center, but like a warehouse, something. And we always end up losing out. And it's because other states, 100% of the time, other than Hawaii, beat us on energy. And you can offer as many tax incentives as you want. You can offer a high-skilled workforce. Energy is the driving factor for a lot of these things. So if I were telling somebody who was building data centers and they were kind of agnostic on where to build them, they just wanted to get them up, I would say the patchwork sort of strategy that you would want to cobble together is look heavily at your states with the low energy costs. But on the other side of the curve, look heavily at the states with the high energy costs and the higher renewable portfolio standards, because you might be able to make money there just by generating power.
You might. So that puts a big focus. It's interesting. I love this whole conversation because none of this is stuff that you're looking at it from the optics of energy. You're saying come into the market and try to get your power plant running and then add a data center to it. And we're like, look, we're trying to make data centers work. And in the past, up until now, in fact, the operators would task you to just go build the 4 walls and a roof and build the density of the MEP, the whole yard that goes with it. But they'll just have a substation right there. The utility will take care of the rest. Now they're like, hey, you need to do the both parts now, right? So the data center was once this, and now it's the data center capacity along with the on-prem power generation as well. And I think that there's places that are buying distressed assets throughout the United States where there's power on some adjacent substation to this pocket of land or that one. So they're going to try to, because it's easier to bring on some fiber than it is to bring on more power infrastructure, right? So I could see us, we're going to certain parts of Texas now that no one would have ever went and built data centers in, right? But now what we need demands a completely different solution, and it's putting us into different pockets in the United States. The things that I see is, we don't know how to deal with. We know how to deal with the authorities having jurisdiction The HJ in your market or the Virginia market or Texas or whatever, we are so used to working with them to build a data center that we also probably know most of those people just as well as you would. What we don't know is the other people that you were listing off on the energy side, So on that side, we have to have their confidence too, it sounds like. And building the data center and checking the boxes from safety. Do we know how to build it? Can we operate it? That's easy. Every operator can prove that. The power plant side is a whole new emergence for us. So it's forcing us to marry ourselves to some of those smaller shops. Like you're talking about, you guys, your main monopoly utility provider sold off components of their utility generation to multiple different groups.
All of them, yeah.
And those are the types of groups that groups like us would have to go partner with, groups like the data center owner operators would have to go partner with that are right now selling it, and their client is the state utility, client list. And in this case, now it'd be the largest, hyperscaler enterprise end users that are the largest enterprise end users that come to that market and have a demand for energy. There's almost like a secondary market just for energy being created because of data centers. So I think where I was going was there's so much, when I was going to the utilization of residential power, there's the base load volume that comes from residential homes because there's so much technology in these homes now that you have refrigerators telling you when they need to order groceries, and you have so much Google Homes and Nest and all of the Ring camera. By the time that you're done with all the technology, that if we were to be able to take those house level, home level base loads away by supplementing those with major solar, then that's a large percentage. That's like 20 to 30 points of utilization of capacity energy to the grid today that we could take back and repurpose towards data centers by freeing up areas and capacities on the grid, for one thing, because you could put solar at the house level and then just tie it in, and then you see the drop at the meter. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. You mentioned, trying to think of where we were. You mentioned that utilities you would just build a data center and the utility would say, we'll figure out how to hook you up.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're hooking up a customer. They're hooking up a customer, right? So they're going to figure it out. The reason they're not willing to, quote, figure it out anymore is, at least where I live, they're just a poles and wires company. That's how they make their money. If you look at your bill, you have multiple charges. You have basically a fuel charge. How much did it cost to make the power? You have a delivery charge. Yeah. Okay. How much did it cost to get you the power? And then you have other subsidies and mandates and things layered on top. But the way that they make their money, the utility company, is on the delivery charge. Okay. So the issue with a lot of this net metering stuff, and you mentioned with building a data center, why today they're going to make you pay for your own interconnection, right? At the micro level, with people's homes, a huge debate now is whether or not a residential solar producer should have to pay the delivery charge both ways, because they're using the utility company's poles and wires. If I'm selling power onto the grid, I'm using their poles and wires to do it. When I'm intermittently buying off the grid, I'm using their poles and wires to do it. So even if I net meter out at zero, I make as much as I take.
Charge.
Should I or should I not pay that delivery charge, the poles and wires charge? That's an interesting debate.
I think there's a reasonable fee that should be expected by the consumer on that, right? I mean, but then again, I don't know. I mean, how old is that infrastructure? Was it paid for like 10 years ago?
Really?
Yeah. So I'm like, I don't know. But they still have to maintain it. There's still costs for those things too, right? Yeah. But like, we're talking about approaching it by trimming the low hanging fruit, by reducing where we are using power on a micro level. Like, you can't use. There's not a data center operator out there that's running an entire data center on solar or wind or any of those things, right? And you never will see those things, but you can apply those to different types of workloads, different types of applications of demand of energy. But on the data center side, what else are you seeing at the state level? I know that you probably, you're here in Austin with me, you're hanging out with people that are here at the Capitol that you probably know because you sit in a lot of political circles. What is your group of people that are there on behalf of the state trying to figure out how to go through permitting for getting people to use large volumes of land in your state versus any other? What's the buzz about data centers outside the industry that I sit in right now from where you see it?
It's not, I hinted at it before. In my circles in New Hampshire, it's not particularly talked about because we're worried about replacing the generation that's retiring. We're worried about how to replace the coal and the natural gas and the oil plants that are going offline in the next decade.
Okay, so, and how are you guys doing that?
That's a good question.
Okay.
New Hampshire as a state is a net exporter of power. And this is one of those ways when the politics get a little interesting and weird, is because a lot of people in New Hampshire say we don't have an obligation to make any more power. We already make all the power we need. The only reason you'd be citing more power here would be to send it to Massachusetts, right? The reality is we're on a regional grid. It's operated by ISO New England. They tell who to make power and they tell them when to make power. So the best use of a lot of these things is going to be fast tracking. We've already passed the law. Fast tracking, repowering, repurposing, retrofitting existing plants. If you want to take a coal burner and you want to retrofit it to burn natural gas, that should be a very easy thing to do, okay? Because you're already burning something dirtier, right? You're turning it into something cleaner. So the impact, health, safety, environmental-wise, is going to be a net positive, okay? Right. If you want to tear down a power plant completely and build a new one there, almost anything that you want to build is going to be a health and or safety improvement over what was there.
Sure,
you know,
sure.
You take down a biomass plant and you put up a small nuclear facility, it's going to be an improvement. So I think that, you know, the hook for data centers in New Hampshire, and I say and other places with a lot of constraints, geographical constraints like New Hampshire, regulatory constraints like states where it's just impossible to build things, is going to be to partner with a company that owns an existing generation site with the intention of turning it into something new and saying, you know, can we partner with you and get a percentage of your installed capacity dedicated for our facility and enter into some kind of economic partnership? Because presently we limit the size of a new facility by interconnection. So if the old facility had 500 megawatts of interconnection, then that's the max size you can build.
For real? They won't ask you to double that if you could?
It's a very interesting question. I have to believe that you could get an exception on that if you had a good reason. There, in the mind of the legislature, they equate, I think, I could be wrong here, I could be oversimplifying. They needed to put some type of size limitation on it, so you weren't buying a 75 megawatt plant and putting a 2,500 megawatt nuke on there. You know what I mean? Is their fear was that people would play games with the law by buying something and building a gigantic monstrosity there. So I think that's why they limited it by capacity or by interconnection. But, you know, an interesting question to be asked would be, if we have a generation facility that we built on a existing site, okay, and the interconnection is only what we're using to send power to the grid. So if, you know, if we have the capability of building a 500 megawatt power plant and you need 100 megawatts for your data center, can we build the 500 megawatt power plant and the 100 megawatt demand data center and rather build a 600 megawatt plant? You understand what I'm saying, right? Because the interconnection only matters what we're trying to put out onto the grid. So you could probably build, long way of saying, you could build a bigger facility than the interconnection would normally allow, if you were diverting a substantial amount of power to the co-located data center.
To your own.
Yeah.
So you could self-generate more than what your 500 limit would be. So if you had 500 for you and 500 for the grid, you could potentially get to a gigawatt there.
Probably.
Okay. So that's interesting to know. And like, all right, what else are you seeing? Are you seeing well, I mean, are you just like a closet nerd? You got into data centers on your own, or what got you in trying to understand these things? Was there someone that tried to kick off a project up there and it made you start the first domino to fall? Or, I mean, how did one get into data centers from the outside looking in?
Well, I'm an energy nerd. Okay. So if I'm a nerd of anything, it's energy, and they're so interconnected now.
Yeah.
You know, because nothing drives data centers more than the energy demand at this point in time. It's like if you were an EV nerd, you would also have to be an energy nerd. right? Because you'd have to be figuring out how to get the power,
Sure.
So, what was the question? I'm sorry.
Well, listen, this is where we're going. Is I'm going to pivot now because
Okay.
we're talking about this. I talk about data centers, the demand of energy, the existential threat of both energy and people, or leadership and talent, and I've talked about it from, I'm trying to really address the problem from every altitude and airspeed. I've gotten operators in here. I've gotten providers of third party, distributed natural gas generation providers. I've gotten renewable people now, but I'm talking about it because I'm really trying to understand a lot of the resistance that you get on the consumer level, right? Like the people that are in New Hampshire, like, I don't want this, I don't want that. I'm getting to the point where, like at South by Southwest, which is coming up, we're speaking about the fifth industrial revolution, and we're talking about the profound impact that data centers will have on humanity. But at the after party for South by Southwest, I'm doing a completely different panel, and that panel is called The Last Industrial Revolution, because I have to address the need of energy to support the adoption rate of emerging technology, specifically around the surge in demand of AI. That energy is finite, where it's untenable based on the way that the U.S. grid is capable of producing and putting power on the grid relative to the amount of demand that the energy provider or the energy giants that are sucking down the most, which are the largest cloud operators, the largest AI operators, and the data center owner operators that house them when they're not building for their own. So those are really the three categories. And right now, you have a lot of people that are, not in my backyard, not over there either, and I don't want this on power, and I don't want that on power. And at the end of the day, we have a 5-year head start. China claims that by the year 2030, they will overtake America with regards to AI, because they have the ability to generate so much energy and power. They'll do 100 power plants, coal power plants in China alone.
Yep.
They have 31 nuclear reactor programs going on right now, 10 for the last 3 years, with the exception of last year, which they had 11 commissioned. My thing are authorized to start. My thing is national security is still a factor, right? So we are sitting here talking about a problem, which is a good first world problem to have. We're a country that has so many things that, like, oh, we don't have enough power, but if we want to, we can go poop power on here and poop power on there and do all these things, unlike a secondary or third tier country. But at the same time, we are now getting to a point where most of the emerging technologies that we are using, they came from America too. Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Oracle, IBM, software, you name it. Most of these technology users are also American born. We are going to lose the dominance that we have on AI to China by 2030 if we don't find solutions for energy. And sitting down with someone on the state level like you for the first time will be the first time that our listeners get to understand how the optics are viewed through you. And you did it perfectly. You were like, hey guys, look at it from a power generation part, and you're going to make money on power generation. And if you put a data center there to support the demand of that energy that you have, that's even better, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is that's a completely different psychology to our industry. Now our industry is becoming part of a larger industry, but as a back tier of demand driver for that industry, right? So this is really the whole genesis behind this podcast, is because you're talking about shit in a way in which I haven't understood it before, and I'm trying to get it. I think that's what most people are even listening. If they're still listening, they're trying to figure out, like, how much does this impact all of us? So we vote for people. Those people vote, and those people voted for a governor in New Hampshire. That governor appointed you to go in there and tell them what needs to be done with this land. And I'm trying to get you to explain to us, like, how does the state look at whether or not they want data centers to come in? And this has been enlightening. I mean, is there anything else that you want to unpackage on these things? I feel like there's, on national security alone, we could pivot for another half hour.
Well, the one thing that usually has a lot to do with whether you get to build the power plant or not is what they call local content or local economic development. And normally it manifests itself in the developer saying, we're going to give enough money to the fire department to buy a new truck. We're going to give enough money to the school to build a new gymnasium, those kind of things.
Yeah.
If you can offer data center construction as an economic benefit that comes along with the project, and torpedoing the energy project, therefore also torpedoes the data center, you're probably more likely to build both as a package deal. Regarding the energy plan and China, and I know a lot of people who go over to China, and China does a great job of looking like they're saving the world with green energy because they're putting the most of everything up there. They have the most wind, they have the most solar. Okay, but they also have the most coal. They're putting up a new coal plant a week. Yeah. Okay, 50 a year.
Almost 2 a week.
Yeah. It's almost 2 a week. Okay, maybe my numbers were old.
100 in a year.
Wow. So the point is this, one of the things that we pride ourselves on in the United States is letting the market decide solutions. And by and large, that has served us very well. The market has given us better technology than anyone else, more innovation, harder workers, more
creative,
holistic solutions to problems. One of the areas where it becomes a little bit of a choke point from a national security perspective is that we don't have an actual coherent energy plan. Okay. If you look at France is almost 100% nuclear. They did it for a lot of reasons. I think they don't have access to fossil fuels. That was one of them. But they also probably on some level didn't want to be dependent on imports.
You're right.
Okay. So that's relevant now because a lot of Europe is dependent on Russian natural gas. France is not dependent on Russian natural gas. And that impacts the posture they're allowed to take or they feel comfortable taking against countries like Russia. Quebec, every province in Canada has their own energy plan. Quebec is 100% or close to 100% hydro. They build these gigantic hydro dams on reservoirs really, really, really far north and run gigantic transmission lines to the site of the demand. That's what we were trying to get in New England that didn't come through. So where I'm going with this is the reason China is probably going to beat us on energy and therefore also possibly beat us on data is because they make a plan and then they follow the plan. Rolling back to the beginning of this conversation when I was
We change our plan in every administration.
It changes every 4 years. Okay. Joe Biden pulled the plug on the Keystone pipeline.
Look at that now.
Day one. We had a project that was proposed in New Hampshire 2 years ago. It was called the Twin State Clean Energy Link. And it would have come from Canada through Vermont into New Hampshire. And it would have been one of those big hydro projects. So it would have been hooked up to one of their gigantic dams. It would have brought us like 1,500 megawatts.
It's a lot.
And it would have been bi-directional. So we could sell to them when they're in peak conditions. They could sell back to us. The Biden administration was offering grant money to state level agencies to help get it permitted. They were throwing IRA money at it. And they said, if you build this, we're going to guarantee certain things. We're going to guarantee you get certain money. We're going to guarantee you get a certain preferred status before FERC and other regulatory bodies. It ultimately didn't get built because I'm assuming it was just deemed to be uneconomical. Okay. And that's with all the grants and with all the preferred treatment from the Biden administration.
It still didn't pencil.
And the other thing was it was all on existing right of way. So it should have been,
easier.
The circumstances were there. So I don't have faith in our country's ability to get our energy situation taken care of. To a lesser extent, I think that that places like New Hampshire will be fine long term because we're just so small, and nobody's depending on us for national security. But if you're talking about beating China with AI, it's a major problem. Okay. Yeah. And even in places like Texas, where I think the circumstances are probably the best, you still have issues like that wide-scale power outage in the winter from a couple of years ago, where from the outside looking in, it looks like, if you take the environmental factors out of it, that one of the things was that when you deregulate the market to the extent that Texas did, you don't have all that capacity standby power that we have in New Hampshire. We have people who are paid to not make power.
Oh, so they're like frequency response on demand.
Stand there. Yeah. And retail customers all the time get angry. They say, why are we paying for these people to not make power? Well, because for the 2 weeks out of the year when you need them to run, you really need them. They make back all the money.
Yeah.
And when you deregulate the market, to the extent that a lot of places like Texas have, I think, and I'm not an expert on Texas energy policy, one of the dynamics you see is there's not an incentive for me to build a power plant that doesn't create power. You know what I mean? So that's I would say one of the good reasons that our rates are higher is because we're paying for capacity. We're paying for extra capacity. But, there's an old saying that what is it? A good plan today is better than the best plan in a week.
Yeah.
Something like that. When countries in Europe decide to take a central planning approach to energy infrastructure and treat it like it's a highway system, right? They're not going to come up with the best plan because governments never come up with the best plan. But it's going to be a plan, and it's going to be a plan that they go full speed towards, right? We have severe energy ADD. You mentioned every 4 years, we get a new energy plan out of the feds.
Right.
You know what I mean? The energy plan that we've gotten so far out of this administration is that I believe we've paused leases on offshore wind, but opened up leases on offshore drilling.
Drill, baby, drill.
Yeah. So whether you like or dislike either of those things, if you're oil and gas, are you spiking the football, or are you saying to yourself, if past is prologue, we propose a project now, we're shovel ready in 2028, whatever, right? Are we going to be shovel ready just in time for a new president to pull the plug? You know what I mean?
Yeah, good call.
You know what I mean? So you can't spin up and
a huge
be ready.
Infrastructure monster like that.
Huge monster like that and be ready. It's because, so even 10-year plans don't ever begin, because you know that you could be doing everything correctly and somebody could pull the rug out from under you. There was a project in Maine that was one of those hydro transmission line projects, and the project got halfway built. It was approved by state regulators, okay? And then somebody got a ballot referendum on the ballot, which there's some mechanism in Maine for, you get enough petition signatures, you can put any issue on the ballot, okay? They get a ballot initiative opposing this project that's half built, okay? And the ballot initiative wins. So the project got stopped.
So whoever threw that money in there just lost that money?
Lost. Now, in fairness, I don't remember the rest of the story. I just remember that a couple of years ago, the public was able to stop a project, not at the permitting phase. If you stop it at the permitting phase because you can demonstrate it would be bad, that's the process working, right? You're giving
input. But if you're already run on the program,
you have half a transmission line, okay? And they say, nope, sorry.
That sucks.
So, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. The reason I love this industry and this type of thing is for the same reason I love energy, is because you have to be somebody who enjoys taking a holistic approach to problem solving. Is if you want to site a data center in, a different state, you have to be, or an energy facility in a different state, you have to be willing to go there and assess the tools you have in your tool belt and do a risk assessment of, what are we looking at? Is this a regulatory choke point? Is this a public opinion choke point? Is it a legislative issue? Could we just change a law at the state level and then be allowed to build it? It sometimes is that simple, because if you can get your project qualified for like a reliability project, then it gets a lot easier. So do we fight with the locals and the NIMBYs? Do we fight with the regulatory authority? Or do we go straight to the state legislature? The answer is always some combination of all of them.
Yeah, you need someone to talk to the local community, I'm sure.
But one of the things that I was successful at as a consultant for utility companies is you have these siloed organizations that are relics from when they were monopolistic companies. You have public relations, and you have government relations, and then you have regulatory law, and you have community relations. And a lot of times they don't all talk to each other. Okay.
Yeah. They hate each other.
It becomes a huge problem. So you need to be somebody who first identifies the problem. What are we looking at? Is this a regulatory choke point? If you ask a regulatory lawyer, they're going to say, of course it is. You know what I mean? We can lawyer our way out of this, right? You need somebody who looks at it more holistically, and you say, what's the problem? What are we looking at? Okay, now that we've correctly identified the problem, what do our personnel resources look like? We got a guy who lives in the community, who's kind of an important guy. We have some stakeholders. We have an environmental org. We have some association, like the National Association I was going to make something up. It could be like a union, somebody who has a financial stake in building this project. And then how do we assemble the people we have into an ad hoc team that can address this problem? There's a saying in utility permitting called the engineer's fallacy. And the engineer's fallacy is that if you're an engineer, you look at every problem as an engineering problem. And they would say, well, that's good. That's probably how they were trained, right? Because they're normally put in engineering problems. But the engineer's fallacy, when overlaid onto siting and permitting, is you tell the public the benefits of the project, okay? The public still opposes you. They say, no, we don't want it. So the engineer goes back and says, maybe I didn't sufficiently give them the facts.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I didn't sufficiently explain the project. Okay. I'm going to try again. So I go back. I explain it again. I said, maybe I didn't tell you about all the jobs. Okay. Maybe I didn't tell you about all the clean energy, right? Nope. They still hate the project. So you go back and you think about it. This is the engineer's fallacy. You know what I mean?
They're just going to keep trying, even though it's not on them. It's on whatever.
Yeah. They cannot believe that there could be another reason to oppose the project. And the way that you avoid this, and what I tell people, it's like you mentioned in one of your podcasts, the special forces, special operations mindset, but I'm specifically talking, I think, about Army SF right now, is if you're going to come into somebody else's community, okay, to accomplish a mission of any kind, you need to be there very early, and you need to be building capital with the locals by listening to their problems and trying to help them find solutions to what their problems are. And guess what? You don't know what their problems are until you're on the ground in the community. That's why you call it the SF mindset, not the Pentagon mindset, right?
Yeah.
Is you go there, you meet with the key leaders, you let them know that you're here to help them solve their problems, okay? And then once you've built up enough capital, they're going to be amenable, or at least more amenable, to helping you with your problems.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies building billion-dollar projects do not do that, okay? Because they fall into the engineer's fallacy mindset, and they say, we're going to come in and we're going to beat them with weight.
Like the design's going to make a business case to justify it.
The design is the best engineered design in history. The local tax benefits, we're giving them $2 million a year in property tax revenue to a town that only has 1 million. I mean, like literally sometimes you're doubling the property taxes in some of these rural towns. Okay. We're going to need, tons of details for police officers and sheriff's deputies. We're buying the fire department new trucks. We're buying the school a new football stadium. Okay. And they laugh people like me, the stakeholder engagement guy, just out of the room. They go, why would we waste 50 grand, 100 grand, whatever, on this sort of, stakeholder engagement, civil affairs, get in the community, organize people, build capital. We can just tell them the project and then they're going to support it. And what people like me will usually say is that, you're going to find, and you don't tell people I told you so, but you get to a point where the project has become so unpopular that now they're buying TV ads. Okay.
Oh.
The project's on TV with $10 million TV ad buy. They're doing mailers. They're doing web ads. You know what I mean? They're hiring super duper high end PR firms who are turning in questionable advice.
They're
you know
digging in opposition.
Yeah. And at that point in time, you should have just invested up front
Yeah.
in
Instead
building
of investing in
capital
lawyers and a PR firm,
instead of the cleanup campaign. The cleanup campaign's always way more expensive.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, all the elite infantry units from the SF or whatever. During the War on Terror, it was notorious that we'd send in our platoon leaders to tribal villages and sit down with the elders and try to understand what they needed and understand what's important to them. And then they would try to get them to buy in, because the chorus is what sings louder than the soloist. So when you have one company trying to move the needle in something versus an embedded community, like, I know most of these large hyperscalers, including the large data center operators now, like, I get to work with some of the coolest, some of the most advanced data center operators in the history of this world are our customers, and they do try to understand the impact they make to any community they go in and make data centers in. So they're trying right off the bat, and we're just the data center side. So the data center operators know that, man, we don't need to run our engines on an emergency and have some neighbors calling because the engines are running at 5 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. But that's when the emergency happened, right? So like they spend a lot of time. Data centers are already doing these things that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. But now we're getting in with the energy groups, and now we have to figure out a way to partner with these energy groups to go deliver one product. AI data center, like, that's a completely different product than cloud data center, right? And now we're going to be putting so much of that online that we have to be in partnership with these small regional energy manufacturers that are selling back to the grid. Mm-hmm. And what I've learned is it's really challenging to kind of understand, because what matters most to them is what you just talked about. You know, from a state perspective, you're like, the power generation, selling demand energy back, is the ability to sell energy back to the utility provider is probably the greatest opportunity they can to generate revenue, where the primary line of revenue they generate today on a data center is the space, the power, and the cooling. Connectivity follows after that, right? So you have three really important things: power, labor of operations, and energy. And connectivity. Those three things, and we're trying to merge those three worlds. It took a long time for the data center world to merge with the connectivity, the telecom world, to understand how fiber made a difference on where we put data centers. But now energy is ripping off the head of that and pooping down its neck. And we have to figure out where to go, where the energy is at. So now you have distressed assets all throughout the country, primarily in the Midwest, old manufacturing plants that aren't being used anymore, but are connected to substations. And those substations, you can run a study and understand, you know, how oversubscribed one substation is to the next, to figure out where there's any capacity available. And that's what you're going to see. We are in the next 5 years have to figure out, one, how to get base load demand shifted to solar at a residential level, which will have probably a 20-point impact on available demand energy at the grid level that could be utilized for data center operators, or large scale industrial manufacturing, which we are manufacturing cloud. We are manufacturing cloud. Saying that we manufacture cloud and that's what a data center is the same as saying we create a fifth utility. The first utility was plumbing. The second was electricity. The third was connectivity. And the fourth was gas. If you added all four of those up on a 100 megawatt scale, you have a data center, even if it's on a 1 megawatt scale. So data center capacity is already the fifth utility. People buy cloud as a utility today. Do you have a phone that uses cloud repository? That's a utility, right? So like we are merging these two things, but we're having a hard time. We're stumbling on ourselves. The operators, and they're the ones with the most advantage. AWS, Google, you know, the groups that are already buying and building these massive things for themselves, they are way ahead of it because they've already been experiencing, you know, buying PPAs and virtual PPAs. Yeah. Now you're talking about on-site generation, and that's a whole nother ball game. And then you have a whole nother group of people that are like, wait a second, I already sell power I generate and sell it back to the utility. I can sell and generate to you too, right? So we're really entering a whole new phase. Power is the theme of every industrial revolution. I think we talked about that once, right? The first was steam. The second was AC/DC power and combustion engine powered flight. In between, we had the discovery of fission, fusion, and hydrogen. And then we had compute power by, you know, starting in the 50s and 60s with mainframes, and which were the precursor for AI, to the type of technology we're using today, all the way through cloud and AI. So if you look at that, each one of those things is its own element of power. Now we're shifting the model, and energy is now the number one limiting factor to how well we could produce and how large we could scale these data centers. And I think everything that you're doing right now and everything that you're forced to really understand, like it may be inevitable. You guys may be sitting on 5 gigs now, in the next few years, and 40% of that is now nuclear, because you have to put another plant online to accommodate the free cooling we could get up in that market and take advantage of, because it's more economically efficient to run a data center in New Hampshire in the winter than it is in Texas or Arizona, perhaps. So there's so many things that are still emerging, but that's the thing, is the soup's not done cooking yet, right? So like, I hope that the state has the same agility every state we go to. There's someone like you that's trying to figure out how to drive solutions, right? How do we, like, I think that we want to find a way to put more power plants online that aren't harming the environment, right? I mean, it has to be either that, or we have to start conceding our lead in AI to China, who's going to overtake us in energy. That's a problem that you guys at the state level are going to have to figure out.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for, and I'm fuel agnostic, more or less, but I think there's a lot to be said for SMRs, small modular reactors.
Do you think New Hampshire would adopt one of those? I know they have one that's 45 years old probably, but do you think they would adopt a new one?
I think the siting and permitting, I think it's going to take, at the strategic level, at the public policy and the public opinion level, nuclear as a generation is going to have to come a little bit further in the public perception of safety. There was a lot of effort put into scaring people,
of course, in
the 20th century. And a lot of people are still, wary of nuclear.
Is that because the people that dominate our advertising spend, if they're not pharmaceutical, they're from the petroleum industries that have an interest in ensuring that nuclear reactors will never erode their profits?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's always the nuclear fits soundly within what we call baseload generation. So the competitors to nuclear are going to be other people who make market competitive baseload power. So
like renewables.
The chief would be natural gas,
yeah.
Right? So, one of the things with nuclear where they find some odd enemies, at least where I live, is a lot of the people who are super pro-renewable are super anti-nuclear, but they're only against nuclear because it's a threat to renewables. So they're not necessarily focusing on the zero emission mission, right? The goal would be net zero or whatever, right? They're married to the generation type. They're so believing in renewables as a generation type that they even see things that are equally clean as being a threat to renewables.
So let me tell you how naive that thought is, right? So if you look at the adoption rate, right, there's linear trending in anything. I can look at the last 16 quarters or 4 years of this industry, and I could draw dots on what the compound annual growth rate looks like. And then I can show you where that's it doesn't grow just linear like that. Sometimes it grows very aggressively, like an insane curve, like a hockey stick, right? But you can see that we are, as a utility, as a grid utility for America, we have a finite amount of energy. We could go through and figure out exactly how much power we have available. We also know how much we're building right now for data centers, and we understand what the linear trend of growth looks like. And if you push that, if you draw the line of the last 5 years and you draw the line of what those dots stack up against for the next 5 years, take the last 5, add the next 5, and you will see that our ability to put more power on the grid is so slow that we outkick that coverage of demand by 2030, meaning if we don't adopt more renewables, if we don't start getting more efficient in how we consume energy at the residential level, freeing up capacity on the wholesale side for commercial and industrial use, and we have 45 gigawatts of renewables that must hit the grid before the end of 2030. 60% or 27 gigawatts of that is just natural gas, right? So if we don't get that on the grid while simultaneously figuring out how between now and then to start nuclear reactors, we will have to start slowing down the growth of the adoption of technology, meaning it's the first time since we've started that we're going to have to tell people to stop adopting new technology. Hey, there's no more iPhones. You can't update that Windows. You can't, because we don't have the power to support your unlimited streaming of demand of technology. Everything that you're doing is just another power demand, and we don't have. So you may want to hold on to renewables, but you will only have enough renewables to last another 4 years. And then after that, our grid runs out of power because we don't have nuclears going. So you're going to have to start telling us what you're going to start self-imposing that you're going to have a limited amount. So what are you going to use it for?
We're not good at self-imposing.
Right. So
in
that's
America. So
we're going to be overran is what I'm saying.
The thing, California, a few years ago, was an excellent example of that, because they said two statements within the course of 24 hours that they didn't understand were connected to each other.
Yes.
Like it was like there were two standalone statements. Statement A was, we are going to have decarbonized our vehicle industry by whatever year.
2030.
Right? 2030. Okay.
Every
new car is going to be EV, right? By 2030. Okay. And then like one day later, the governor comes out and says, it was like wildly hot, like peak California, 100-degree days or whatever, right? We need everybody to
stop plugging in the cars,
not plug in your EVs and not run your AC, like if you don't absolutely need it. There was something like that, like try not to run your AC. And people like me say to things like that, is I say, this is not South Africa, okay? We don't experience load shedding, which is down there, scheduled blackouts that just roll all the time, okay? We have all the technology in the world. We have the best workers. We have the best scientists and engineers, most of them. We have the capability to make energy both abundant and super duper cheap, okay? This is a completely man-made crisis.
Right, by politicians.
And it's kind of infuriating. I don't live in California, obviously, that we're having that conversation anywhere in the United States, because of all the things, of all the resources that we have, we should always have a plan to get enough power to meet anticipated demand. Okay. And if we've war gamed out the trajectory of EVs and we've planned out the trajectory of data centers, okay? And another big one is this same states are not allowing people to have natural gas anymore, so everybody's on electric heat, okay? But you say that concurrently with you can't use that stuff all the time because we don't have enough power. That's infuriating that we have that discussion in the United States, because I'm actually for a lot of those things. You know what I mean? I'm for EVs if we can make them affordable and we can build the infrastructure and we can make them safe. Okay. I'm for renewable energy, certainly as distributed generation. Okay. Certainly in instances where it's super sunny or very windy, I'm also, generally speaking, of the opinion that electrifying homes is probably a good idea. All right? Rather than depending on heating fuel for homes. And we have the ability to do all that. We're just deciding not to. And yet you cannot have the two conversations separately. And this is the part that bugs me, is you cannot have the conversation of all these ambitious net zero plans that we have as a society and then not let people cite any new generation anywhere.
Yeah.
And to draw the comparison, because I always explain math to people, is a mid-size coal plant is 500 megawatts. A mid-size nuclear plant, 1,000 megawatts. Okay. A wind turbine onshore has the installed capacity of 3 megawatts, but you get 1 megawatt because the wind's not always blowing, at least not in New Hampshire. So you count on a wind turbine as 1 megawatt. Okay. So to replace a coal plant, back of the envelope math is pretty easy here. 500 of them. Okay. 500 co-located wind turbines to replace a coal plant. 1,000 of them to replace a nuclear plant. Okay. When you get into acres of solar, I believe it's something like 30,000 acres of solar to replace
100 megs.
No, it's not. I wanted to say to replace 500 megawatt coal plant, I think.
So I just had someone on and they were telling me it's 30 and 5 is a ratio between solar and wind.
Okay.
So, and the wind has to be far enough, like you were explaining that wind turbine issue that you were talking about where, you know, it has the lights that have to come on and there's certain things, but something else was triggering something to stop working. And what they've learned was when they have too many of these turbines too close to each other, one will trigger the other one, you know, to run, and they have to space them out at a certain distance, more so than what I thought. Keep going. Sorry.
So the math on renewables right now just doesn't add up. You know, you're not taking a 500 megawatt coal burner offline.
It looks like the maximum capacity we could get to in the next 5 years is 45 gigs of renewables is the maximum capacity we have the infrastructure to create. It's estimated between now and the end of 2030. So like I'm listening to you, and a majority of it is going to be natural gas, but there will be solar and wind. But there's also biothermals and hydrogen.
Yeah. Is natural gas renewable?
Well, it depends. It's like you're saying that hydroelectric isn't viewed as renewable, but most of the people that were going up the Pacific Northwest as an example to chase down data center capacity is because they viewed that the hydroelectric capacity that we were using was better than coal, right? Whether it penciled out better or not, but the optics were important because a lot of these people that are building the sky for the cloud, they're building cloud applications for large energy users and energy manufacturers. So they're trying to balance themselves out. But I think in our industry, it's generally referred to as renewable. But that's why I was surprised when you said hydro wasn't in your world.
Yeah, large hydro. Yeah, and the reason is...
Is it more expensive? I mean,
no,
hydro is cheap where we're building.
It's that you have to flood a reservoir to build it. And there's a methane component because of decomposing
organics,
biomass, organic product in there. I mean, the fact is these reservoirs were flooded a long time ago, like a really long time ago.
Yeah.
But no, as of right now, I think it's still not classified as renewable.
So you guys are just counting solar and wind as renewable only?
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, I think that the people that are making purchasing decisions on the enterprise side are going to do it based on two forms of green. You know, how green is it relative to fossil fuels and how economically efficient is it versus the power of the dollar, right? So, I mean, green is green. You know, some people are like, hey, I want the most this. And then you tell them what the price is. They're like, I don't need that. They want to make these purchasing decisions to where they're being better stewards. But at the same time, like right now, every data center owner operator, the market shifts, right? Where it's based on the law of supply and demand. When the demand is high and the supply is low, the prices per kW are increasing. And right now there's really, tenant vacancies are very low and there's not a lot of capacity. We're already building capacity today that's sold out and won't be live until 2026, late 2026 in some capacities. I think that, everybody's racing to land grab, the land bank, and the power bank right now that no one gives a shit about ESG. They care about getting as much as they can. And if they can buy stuff where, you're buying offsetted credits for a green energy form, then even better. Maybe on a percentage of it, 25 percentage points seems like a pretty fair mandate. 1/4 of what I do has to be renewable. Well, then I'll go buy offsetting credits for the renewables that I need, knowing that I just need as much as I can. I can only afford to pay a premium on 25% of it.
Yeah.
Right? That's how those PPAs will be stroked. But look, there's a lot of stuff here to unpackage on energy, but I think we'll bring this one back home because I know this is the first of a conversation and not the last, but what is it that I asked you to come on and share what astroturfing was, and like, so that people weren't listening. I mean, that's incredible that we don't see that. We don't understand, I mean, I guess it should be obvious, you hear all these stories where US aid was paying George Soros to go out and have protesters be at this thing versus that thing. So it shouldn't be surprising to us. That's the beauty about technology, is the transparency it's giving us, the understanding what's really happening to us and with us. But I do think that we're going to have to change the way that we do this, and understanding the way that a state regulatory agency or authority looks at things is really important for our industry. So what else would you add or leave with us that we probably haven't talked about, or I haven't given you the chance to unpackage, because it's impossible to unpackage the complications of what it takes to go into a certain state or a market and really generate, generation plans for more energy. But what would you like to leave us with that we didn't think about or talk about yet?
Well, focusing on the regulatory structure is you absolutely need to conduct intelligence on the differences between states. They can be wildly, wildly different. My state has a very heavy public input component to it. It feels more like a town hall meeting sometimes than a court. Other agencies in other states are more like courts. You come in, you have the boxes checked, the permits check out, you file the papers, you get to build.
Yeah.
Okay. These days, energy companies and energy developers who go into situations and say, we're going to have our regulatory lawyers do the regulatory, and then we're going to have our lobbyists just go to Capitol Hill or wherever and talk to people. You're walking into a wood chipper. Okay.
Yeah.
Because the grassroots component is massive. Your competitors in the energy sector realize that they can spend $100,000 on a grassroots campaign against you and delay your project or kill it outright. Okay. And sometimes delay is the name of the game, because they've calculated how much money you lose in terms of burn rate.
Yeah.
Right. But then also in terms of not being in service, right? If you're in service 2 years later than you were supposed to be in service, you lost 2 years worth of profits from generating power. Right. So what they will do is they'll take a modest, and by modest, I mean modest relative to the cost of your project, $100,000, $200,000. They'll hire a political consultant who does political campaigns for a living. He will either work with an existing environmental organization or just create his own. Okay. And you create your own, you call it, Keep Austin Beautiful, or you
have a good intent.
Call it Citizens for Energy Freedom, right? And you engage in grassroots organization to bring organic followers into this group. You do not say, we are designed to block the energy project. You put up a smoke screen. You engage people on a variety of issues. You hold town hall meetings on, everything energy. How can I be more sustainable? How can I apply for solar panel subsidies? What are some bills up at the state capitol I can go and testify on that'll make our grid more resilient or greener or, more sustainable, right? How can I get plugged in? You plug all these people in and you build capital, and then you flip the switch and you say, there's a project that's being proposed that I think would be very bad for everything we've been working together on for the past couple of years. Or conversely, there's a project that could be very good because maybe the developer was the one engaging in this. But then the project gets built and it turns into a proxy war between the two energy giants. They're not fighting each other directly. They're just arming the Viet Cong to shoot at you. Okay. Right. And the people back in the C-suite of your client or of your company say things like I said before. They say, I don't understand. We told them about the jobs, right? We told them about the millions in economic, benefit.
How this puts money into their schools.
We told them we're building a new rec center. They don't care. Okay. So that's how these energy interests and then competitors will block each other. At the policy level, at the public opinion level, you have dynamics like the Beyond Coal campaign. Okay. The Beyond Coal campaign went against coal, okay, and was fairly successful in shutting down coal. And they enlisted it was a offshoot of the Sierra Club. And they went hard from an environmental perspective. They riled up these environmental organizations. They got grassroots environmental activists to carry their water and, lobby their legislatures and show up to hearings and talk about how coal was the devil. Okay. Comes out that campaign was funded in large part by the fracking industry.
Yeah.
Okay. And guess who the Sierra Club conveniently was not going after for that window of time? The fracking industry. They were leaving them alone. So, that doesn't mean that they were doing the right thing or the wrong thing in that situation. It just means that the message that you're getting is always paid for by somebody.
Yeah.
It's information warfare. So at the macro level, you have allies who do not necessarily agree with each other on the actual battlefield. So, a good example of that would be renewable energy at the policy level, at Congress, at the State House. They're more or less a unified voice. Okay. We want to make laws that make it favorable for more renewable energy everywhere. And that means increasing RPS standards. So like my state's required to 25%, I think. Other states are way higher. Okay. So how do we make it easier for us to do business? We lobby the legislature, keep raising that cap. You know what I mean? Because a bigger pie, if I get a smaller piece of a big pie, I'm still getting a bigger piece, right?
Yeah.
Grow the pie. At the tactical level, when company A has bought a parcel of land and is proposing a project, and that grassroots organization of the NIMBYs shows up to the town hall meetings and yells at everybody and says that the wind farm is going to destroy their community, okay? The likely suspect that people blame within and without the industry is they say, oh, it's the fossil fuel companies again. It's the fossil fuel companies blocking the wind. Well, in a lot of cases, they're not competing with the wind because the fossil companies are competing on the market and the wind's competing for the RPS. So a lot of times, wind company A is fighting a guerrilla war against wind company B. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you have two projects in similar areas. The interconnection's limited. It can only feed one project. Okay. So the instances at the strategic level where fossils are at war with renewables is all over the whole map. Okay. All the time. At the tactical level, you have these battles that are quite often fought between two people trying to do the exact same thing.
Man, this is so fascinating to understand how this all works. I mean, I had no idea how complicated it was, but what I'm getting from you is this will still be a technology play. We're going to have to, like, for these people that are, even for us, groups like us are going to be hired by groups to go build power plants. We're going to have to make sure that they're investing at the grassroots level, it sounds like. Yeah. And the best way to do that is probably to weaponize technology, social media as an example, targeting certain millennials or Gen Z or whatever it is. And again, it means the dependency for this war to be fought or even won or lost in one direction or the other will be dependent on the ability for an existing data center to house the technology that's used to fight these wars.
Exactly.
Everything comes back to a data center when it's all said and done. And the data center, when it comes to the data center, everything comes back to power and how much power we need. So this has been great. I think that you've really helped us unload a few things. And look, there's people that are going to listen to this stuff. Hopefully there'll be kids in college that are going to be like, I'm going to get into this energy vertical. If I got to understand the need of energy or power, and I have to understand it from a financial construct to understand what drives it to make it, what is going to make it to where some community can't come in and be like, we're shutting you down. I can't imagine how much a program costs that some community leader shut down, but that's scary stuff. If you're a business, you're going to have a hard time going to certain states where you know that could happen.
Yep.
But you are, it's like this. If we don't build these data centers, if you're like, no, we don't want them, let them go outsource those and manufacture those somewhere else. Well, one, it's the most advanced weapon machinery technology on earth. Two, we outsource 2/3 of the world's population is in Asia, between India and China, and they represent 80% of the manufacturing in the world now, roughly. They also represent 85 to 87% of the world pollution. So like we are learning that we have to bring manufacturing back. This is the manufacturing of data centers, and it's going to be requiring a ton of energy. And if we don't do it, then we're letting these products, the most strategic products in national defense, go to other countries to be built because we don't want to put power online. And if that happens, that is the ultimate way to lose to China and their allies, and who can maintain the dominance that we have today on technology. So this is incredible times, man. Go ahead.
I want to add one thing
Yeah.
Regarding the beginning when you asked how I got here. Is I'll talk at college conferences and classes and stuff about how to work in politics and government.
Sure.
Right? Like, what's the pathway? And my pathway was very circuitous. But what I will tell people is I will say, find what you're interested in and develop skills and subject matter expertise without regard to how those things necessarily are going to mesh together at some point in time. Because at some point in time, it's all going to click. Okay. And I use an example that's kind of a silly example, but when I was probably 23 or 24, I was talking to a recruiter from the US Army. And this guy clearly had a quota, and he clearly had bonus money to be spent to get in mechanics. Okay. He was doing the hard sell for mechanics.
Sure.
And I was pushing back. I didn't want to be a mechanic. And he kept coming back. And, I said, I understand fully that mechanics are equally important to the lethality of the overall organization as anybody else. It's just not something I'm particularly interested in doing. And he said, what are you interested in doing? So I said, I don't know. I said, probably jump out of planes or something. And he goes, son, today's your lucky day because you can be an airborne mechanic. Okay. And I went away from that, thinking that guy was, just telling me what I wanted to hear. But that conversation has stuck with me for a really long time because there have been many times in my life when I've ended up being the airborne mechanic, meaning they've needed somebody for a very specific job who had a very specific set of skills, and I was the only person to do it. And that's applicable to everything. So if you're somebody trying to get into the sector, energy, data, develop expertise and skills in different areas, and I guarantee you they'll all click together. For me, political campaigns, I had no idea where that was going to go. And then lobbying and government relations, and then segging into energy, okay, from a policy perspective. Now, regulatory. And now I'm sitting here at a point in time when we are probably about to experience, you may say already experiencing,
Data center gold rush.
a gold rush in data centers.
Mm-hmm.
So, and everybody out there, if you put time into getting better at things and learning skills and becoming an expert in just literally anything that interests you, you're going to find your own gold rush opportunity if you keep pushing forward. It's not going to be apparent. It's going to come out of nowhere, but
I think it's awesome. I think that if there's a parent that's listening right now and they're not sure what their kid wants to do, there's a job that they could find in this industry. Maybe that job hasn't even been invented yet, but it will be in the next year or so because this industry is about to explode. Once we get our hands on more energy, we figure out how to build these things faster, safer, this industry is going to explode once again. So, listen, I really appreciate you coming to Austin and sitting down with me and helping educate our listeners. And for everybody that's listening, I hope that you comment and thank you for following the podcast. Hope you like it, reshare it. But man, it was awesome to sit down with you and really understand how complicated it is at that level. It's incredible how much shit you guys have to deal with to try to make things work. But it helps make sense and it helps set expectations for us on this end for sure. So I appreciate it, man. Thanks for joining the revolution.
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You got it, man.